Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking about the climax of the Sepulcher of the First One's raid, and by extension, kind of the climax of 9.2, and by extension, kind of the climax of Shadowlands itself. We are talking the fate of the Jailer, the life of the Jailer, and the community reaction to what did and did not happen, or shown, because there is no way of getting away from it. Reaction to the end of this raid has been, I'm going to say mixed, but it's kind of like how a Molotov cocktail is mixed, you know? Something it would be weird not to talk about in the process of analysing these cinematics. Oh yeah, there's two. And which was also, of course, sadly very predictable. My prediction is that everyone's going to be very underwhelmed by this cinematic. That's my prediction. Because the cinematic is not for wrapping up what happens with the Arbiter. It's not for wrapping up what happens with Sylvanas. And because it's not going to wrap up important things like that, people are going to be very, very disappointed. They will hate it. They will hate it, absolutely. So this video is going to be a little bit different from our usual deep dives. We're going to look at the cinematics in the usual way, stopping, starting, skipping bits, and just generally talking all over the top, having a good old nerdy time with it taken on its own terms, and then we're going to have a look at the community reaction and basically why this ending is so unpopular. Because I've been reading a lot of takes online in the last 24 hours, and whereas, of course, I disagree with a lot of the unnecessary viciousness of a lot of the discourse, I am sympathetic to many of the feelings of disappointment, frustration, and confusion that many players have. And with my film analysis head on, I think I can identify and highlight the single biggest crime that the end cinematic commits that has caused a lot of people to feel this way, which I'm actually really looking forward to getting into. So I think you should watch the critical analysis first, but I understand if you want to skip straight to the really juicy bit. And so there is a dedicated chapter for that. Be nice. Gosh, this is very serious and dramatic, isn't it? I've got good things to say as well, I promise. So join us as we ask, what?
Can your mortal minds fathom how long I have waited?
So like I say, there are actually two short cinematics that bookend the Jailer fight, and we're going to start, as is tradition, with the intro. You'll probably have noticed, but I have not had a chance to actually do the Jailer fight myself yet, which I hate because I really think that the context of the gameplay leading up to and after these cinematics is really important in an analysis. So I'm sorry about that, and yeah, we're using Wowheads footage from last night, link in the description. And what should be a fairly standard Let's Rumble from the big boss is elevated beyond that by a really neat reveal and lore snippet.
Every event set in motion, every pawn put into play.
So as we approach Zovaal in his disco arena, which gloriously, because we always like to see Blizzard respond to feedback, and my feedback after seeing the trailer was that the Jailer's disco arena could be even more disco. That was my official feedback. So you can imagine I was very pleased to see that they added a literal disco ball in the middle of the room, which I guess technically is a map of Azeroth, but also absolutely a disco ball. And the Jailer gives this intriguing monologue. The idea that Zovaal considers himself the only capable adult in the room is something that we talked about in the last analysis and something that will come up again in the next bit. It's one of the few character traits that we actually have for the main antagonist of this entire expansion, along with poor diction, a penchant for cliche baddie lines, and razor-sharp nipples. But here he is, bigging up his own achievements in getting to this point where he has escaped the Maw and now stands on the brink of realizing an aim that was apparently decided on countless thousands of years ago. The aim of remaking the whole of existence for... with the now ubiquitous shot of the Ice Crown skybox, the tearing open of which started this whole expansion in the official trailer, but unexpectedly perhaps, the camera starts to pan down.
All to claim the power slumbering within your world.
And the camera continues to pan down, first to ground level, then through the earth to whatever lies beneath. I can't be the only one who, just for a split second, thought that we might be about to see Azeroth's World Soul presented in glorious 1080p. It appears we're not quite ready for that reveal yet, but what we get instead is almost as surprising, even if perhaps it shouldn't be.
The soul of Azeroth, wounded, vulnerable, yet teeming with potential.
It's the Forge of Souls, one of the smallest and seemingly most insignificantest dungeons in Wrath of the Lich King, which until now was pretty vague in its lore, to be honest. Quick history lesson, fam! So in Warcraft 3, we see Arthas head to Northrend and essentially summon Icecrown's citadel into existence. But that got retconned in Chronicle Volume 3, with Icecrown having been built by the Dreadlords before Arthas even got there. But either way, the Forge of Souls is referred to in official literature as being the latest weapon in the Lich King's arsenal, which suggests that they were built under the stewardship of Arthas, but whether he was in charge or it was the Dreadlords that did it, really, it was built by the Jailer. And they are basically big soul grinders that like grind up souls to power big machines and stuff with what we now know is anima, something that we've seen a lot of in the Shadowlands, of course. And so if you needed enough power to reorganize all of reality, the soul of Azeroth would probably be your best bet for the grinder. It's basically what the Jailer has been saying his plan is all along, which is why so many of us predicted it at the start of the expansion, and it's actually pretty cool that this old, seemingly insignificant dungeon wing is given such an important role here. In hindsight, maybe we should have been suspicious when we were asked to run the soul forges in the Jailer's actual house every week. And actually another neat little detail here is that now I look at it, the environment in the Sepulcher leading up to the Jailer's boss room is obviously very different in aesthetic style, but very similar in terms of layout, with narrowish walkways leading to big platforms, as if the Jailer, knowing what he wanted the Forge of Souls to eventually be used for, based the design on the part of Zereth Mortis that he would utilize it for. It's neat, I like it.
Potential that I will use to eradicate this flawed reality.
And, as I guess the anima or Titan equivalent of it is processed by the Forge and sent through the crack in the sky to the Shadowlands, giving that whole skybox a more meaningful purpose than just looking really cool and being the gateway for a few more spawn in the pre-patch. And also, and I hate to say this, turning Icecrown into a literal conduit. Very fitting for Shadowlands. There is one pretty big question, isn't there? All that tasty Azeroth juice appears to be getting sent directly to Torghast, which is a bit weird because the Jailer doesn't live there anymore. That gaff belongs to us now, and sure, we don't have free reign of the place, there's still baddies everywhere, but the Jailer left it behind as he made his escape. How is the Azeroth juice finding its way from Torghast to Zereth Mortis? Is it explained in the boss fight itself? Spoiler, but basically nothing is explained in the boss fight itself. No, I tell a lie, there is one interesting line in that fight where the Jailer, in amongst all his annihilations and destructions, says that Azeroth, as in the world soul of Azeroth itself, is resisting his attack, which is something. Yeah, but nothing on the Torghast to Zereth Mortis pipeline. Maybe we'll find out one day, because at the moment this doesn't really make much sense to me, but everything else about this intro I really like. It's got a cool lore reveal, it's consistent with the Jailer's stated aims throughout the expansion. He talks about eradicating this flawed reality here, which is something we get more specifics on later. It gives more purpose and connection between Icecrown and Torghast. It's really cool, and his closing line is fun too. At the beginning of Shadowlands, he said,
Death comes for the soul of your world.
Here he says,
Death claims the soul of your world.
he's already won in his eyes. And the line from the 9.1 Sanctum of Domination raid cinematic
This reality's
has evolved to
bear witness, mortals, to eternity's end.
which could be meaningful too. We'll come back to that one as well. And yes, the Jailer is still about as exciting as a midweek 0-0 between Stoke and Cardiff, but he does at least look pretty badass. And with this intro, we've established a clear objective for the fight. We need to stop him doing that. Basically, this one delivers. Let's move on to the finale and the death of the Jailer.
This must not be.
We open with this shot of the Jailer falling to his knees, and we really focus on that because it's an inversion of the end of the 9.1 cinematic, where he recovered his power and forced us all to kneel, revealing, of course, the true extent of his plan to Sylvanas in the process. Now that power is leaving him again upon his defeat here, his badass armor evaporating away in the same manner that the Arbiter evaporated when he reclaimed his orb atop Oribos. Zovaal, being Zovaal, picks another random page from his bumper book of baddie lines for kids and lands on
This must not be.
As we get sharp short cuts of scenes from previous cinematics in reverse order to show us that we are now traveling back in time here, further suggested by the flickering image quality and slightly faded color grading, which is internationally recognized visual representation code for the olden times. I guess because it suggests like older recording equipment. And we get to see a very important moment from the jailer's past, his judgment and sentence at the hands of his fellow Eternal Ones.
You have betrayed your duty as Arbiter, and shall be bound forevermore. Your madness has threatened the cycle of life and death entire.
With each giving their opinion in turn, the Archon being exactly as serious and self-righteous as you'd imagine. But there's something else I find far more interesting than that. Look at the skybox here. This is set on the Arbiter's platform on top of Oribos. Zoval's trial is happening in the big icon in the center platform, which is actually kind of disappointing because I'd love it if he were on his Covenant icon platform, which was destroyed after he got sent to them all. Mostly just because I'm very nosy and I'm curious to see what his Covenant sigil looked like. You sense this has also got a little bit of foreshadowing to it, because it is probably here, once all this is done and dusted, that Sylvanas will face judgment too. But the reason I mention it is because the Oribos skybox here is a far cry from the anima-rich glowing blue and silver that we saw at the start of the expansion. It looks much more similar in colour to how it does now, after the Maw expanded and put the city of Oribos in danger. Totally accept this could just be a stylistic choice, adding a sepia-tinged quality to further reinforce the old photograph feel of the flashback. But the Archon says that in the course of whatever Zovaal actually did, he betrayed his duty as the Arbiter, and the state of the sky could definitely be evidence and fallout of that. If Zovaal neglected his duty to pursue the knowledge of the Sepulcher, as has been suggested, then there was no sorting hat to sort all of the souls, which, as we know from the beginning of Shadowlands, leads to disaster. You know, maybe Zovaal abandoning his post even created the Maw in the first place, as all of the lost souls not being sent to any covenants coalesced into a new space. Or maybe the red sky is the result of Zovaal's attempt to forcefully try to bring his kin under his control. We know he did that. Whatever the exact reason, I think that the absolute state of the Oribos skybox here is supposed to show us that there were very real consequences of Zovaal becoming obsessed with the Sepulcher and the knowledge of the First Ones. I like how it skips back to present-day evaporating Zovaal here to suggest that this is something happening internally in his own mind in the moment of his death, reliving arguably the defining moment of his life. The Winter Queen refers to what Zovaal did as his madness, which threatened the cycle of life and death, which, yeah, no shit, Queenie, that's kind of his entire plan, you know, keep up.
You could have sought another way, brother. Imagine what we could have accomplished together.
And as we cut away again, we see that it is not just the jailer's armor disintegrating, it's his entire flesh body, revealing or maybe reverting to the OG Zereth Mortis construct beneath. Is this suggesting that all the Eternal Ones are these prototypes underneath their skin, or is he de-evolving into almost like the clay from which he was formed? I don't think it's very clear, and although it's probably the former, I'm inclined to think that it's the latter, firstly because he looks surprised here. We have seen Denathrius and the Archon get pretty badly maimed in this X-Pack without dying. Zovaal imprisoned the Primus instead of killing him. The Eternal Ones imprisoned Zovaal instead of killing him. I'm still of the mind that the Eternal Ones can't actually be killed in the Shadowlands, and this de-evolution thing is like a weird and unexpected result of being killed in Zereth Mortis, or the Sepulcher specifically. I basically just like that better than they are all robots underneath, so that's what I choose to believe. And because Blizz obviously don't really want to tell us, then I get to lean towards the explanation I like best. That's how it works. Interesting too to see Denathrius's contribution to the trial, showing that from the very beginning he was sympathetic to the jailer's aims, at least, and while being careful not to get himself in trouble with the other Planeteers, you can absolutely see here how later he would have reached out to the jailer and begun the alliance that laid the very first stones for the jailer's eventual escape. The most important line, though, comes from the Primus.
Why, Zovaal? What drove you to this end?
which is the first and only time that we see the action of this flashback from a character's point of view other than Zoval's. Peering down at the seal-smooth, pre-domination ruined-up Zovaal, wearing the shackles that have otherwise only been seen in the CGI Shadowlands sizzle reel at release. You know, the one that made us all think that we were going to be getting BFA-style CGI cinematics throughout this expansion too. Probably best not to think about how cool those would have been. But notably, the Primus is the only one who asks Zovaal why he did what he did. And I know what you're thinking, and I agree, it's a question for Section 2.
You preserve that which is doomed. A cosmos divided will not survive. What is to come?
And as the surprisingly vulnerable-looking Zovaal reveals that the cosmos is doomed, and by that presumably he means like life and death divided, but also light, void, arcane, and fell too will not survive what is coming, which is the big reveal and tease, right? We knew at the beginning of the expansion that Zovaal wanted to break down the barriers between life and death. Then we found out that he wanted to remake the whole of reality, not just life and death. And then we found out that as well as wanting to do all that, he wanted to be the leader of the new reality. Now we're discovering that as the only capable adult in the room, remember, specifically him being the leader of a new reforged singular cosmos will protect it from the threat to come. We'll get into the meaning of all this in the next section, but something to take away from this is obviously we are not told what that threat is, but importantly, we are shown that the other eternal ones aren't told either. The Primus asks why he did what he did because the Primus doesn't know and the Jailer doesn't tell him. And why would he? Zovaal is the only capable adult in the room in his own eyes. And the Archon and Queenie don't even care. Archon is just angry that he betrayed his duty, which in fairness is quite on brand. She dismisses Uther's valid concerns in a similar tunnel vision kind of way millions of years later. And Queenie is more concerned that he almost ruined the balance between life and death. Also very on brand, her covenant straddles the two realms in a very unique way. The only one who could feasibly know what the Jailer is even talking about here is Daddy D, and it was enough to make him secretly join forces with him, so make of that what you will. A lot has been made of the similarity between this situation and that of Sargeras and even N'Zoth at the end of BFA, and that's fair, but there are some intriguing differences that I want to point out. When Sargeras found out about the Void Lords, something that, remember, hasn't even happened yet when this flashback is taking place, Sargeras specifically tries to enlist the help of the other Titans. He asks for help, and they refuse to join in on the whole wiping out all life in the universe so the Void don't get it thing, so he fought and killed them. And this is kind of the exact opposite of that scenario. Zovaal specifically keeps the threat that he has discovered from the other Covenant leaders and tries to deal with it all himself, and then they defeat him. It's not a copy so much as an inversion of the more famous story. At the end of BFA, N'Zoth basically comes out and says that we need him for protection against another big looming threat, which most people took to mean death and the Jailer, and have drawn parallels between N'Zoth and the Jailer basically having the same line here. The yes, I'm trying to kill you, but it's to protect the universe from the real threat line, which is a fair criticism, don't get me wrong, let the memes flow, etc. But what if N'Zoth wasn't talking about the Jailer? What if our Tentacly Overlord and Zovaal here have the same line because they are talking about the same thing? What if they are both referring to the same threat? Whatever it is, the first ones, the firster ones, the firstest ones, or something completely different and as yet unimagined. Or Azeroth? Well, whatever it is, we're not going to find out today. The Jailer has failed in his plan to remake the cosmos as one glorious whole with himself inserted as its leader, which in the short term at least is definitely good news as he reverts to his proto form and we say goodbye forever to those glorious nipples. his lifeless form remaining quite literally as a statue, a monument to these events at the heart of the Sepulcher. The way one scene fades into the other here almost makes it look like this pure, original, untainted jailer has a halo created by the sky above Icecrown. As we see that tear in the sky close, not violently like it was opened at the beginning of the expansion, but in a slower way, almost like a wound healing. Control has been wrested back from the disrupting force. Nature is literally healing. And this change in the skybox is represented in-game too, and you know how much I love a skybox that changes with in-game events, so I am sold. And that is the end of the jailer. I'll miss him. No, I won't. And that's the cinematic. Now, why do people hate it? Okay, well, first of all, let me highlight some things that I really like about them. I really like the unexpected utilization of the Forge of Souls as an intrinsic part of the jailer's plans, and the cool way it's revealed. I like that they tried to show us a bit of the jailer's history and fill in some gaps about his story up to this point. The jailer is basically the most boring WoW villain ever, and that's purely with the lack of space and attention and scenes like this that they have given him. So obviously it's not enough to save the character, but it's better than never having done it. And I'm gonna be honest, I really like the what is to come ending as well. I don't personally agree with the take that this is the jailer saying that he did everything he did for us or to save us all. I mean, of course Zovaal thinks he's doing the right thing. Every baddie is the hero of their own story, and Zovaal's major bad guy trait is basically his lack of faith in anyone else apart from himself. Something that I said in the last video, which is even more abundantly clear here. He thinks he is the only one that can stop whatever he's talking about, and for him the only safe reality is the one where he is in charge, and of course we have to stop that. Honestly, I don't even mind the there's always a bigger bad fatigue that it borders on, because like I say, I like the idea that he and N'Zoth are both talking about the same threat, but that the Void Gods think they are the only ones that can deal with it, and their plan for dealing with it is that they need a Void Titan, and that's why N'Zoth even exists in the first place. And I also like that that brings up the possibility that actually in all of the different parts of the cosmos, from light to life to fel to arcane, there's someone or a group of people who also know about whatever this threat is, and they all think that they are the only ones that can be trusted to deal with it, which is why they are all at each other's throats. I think that would be a really interesting groundwork for future stories. And this bit is very subjective, I know, but I am definitely not in the camp of players who just hate all of the cosmic disco war stuff either. I know there are many of you, and man, I am not saying that you're wrong. I am totally sympathetic to your dislike of all the space shit. Personally, I find it really interesting. I love the way that Chronicle created the cosmos mythos. I'm really into it. I've been entertained by every reveal and insight into it since. And I say that being someone who totally agrees that I really want an Azeroth expansion next, you know? After 2 years in Shadowlands, running around the Dragon Isles feels very enticing right now. And these 2 points, always a bigger bad syndrome and the continued push of the disco war, are definitely contributing factors to some of the negative reactions towards the cinematic though. But I've thought a lot about this. I don't think they are the real problem. I don't think that the problem is that the jailer's actions don't make sense. Like I say, I think Zovaal has been pretty consistent in his objectives throughout the expansion. I also don't think that the problem is another common criticism, that the cinematic was purely focused on the jailer and didn't tie up any other threads from the expansion. We keep calling this the end of Shadowlands, but it's not. There's still campaign quests coming up dealing with, for example, replacing the Arbiter and whatever happens to Sylvanas, an arc which you could justifiably argue is the actual main story of Shadowlands anyway. This was an end of raid cinematic, not an end of expansion one, so it didn't need to adequately end the expansion, in my opinion. Hello, future Taliesin here, in the middle of the edit. There's one other fairly big reason for hating this cinematic that people give, which I stupidly forgot to even mention in this video, mainly because I don't actually consider it to be a criticism of this cinematic, but it's the idea that Blizzard has butchered 20 years worth of WoW lore to kind of shoehorn the jailer in. Now that might be true, that might not be true, but it's a separate discussion. This cinematic fails irrespective of any of that and on its own terms, and why that is what we're trying to work out here. Thank you. Oh, by the way, even more important message from the future, whatever you do, do not go to the... No, to my mind, there's one very clear reason why this cinematic fails to land in the way I think it's intended. And although I think overall the cinematic is fine, if disappointingly underwhelming, I totally agree with the consensus that it does essentially fail. And for me, it's in the way that it fumbles a pretty standard filmic convention in a very frustrating way. Remember when I highlighted the flashback as one of the things that I really like about the cinematic? Well, let me clarify. I like it in principle, because in practice, this is the reason the entire thing fails. Let me play this short section for you again, but with one minor addition to show you what I mean.
You have betrayed your duty as Arbiter. Your madness has threatened the cycle of life and death entire.
You could have sought another way, brother.
Why, Zovaal? What drove you to this end?
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
See, the thing about this flashback is, it's an establishing flashback. It's a setup. It asks a question with the promise of an answer. A question asked out loud by the Primus. Why did you do it? And as many have observed, this flashback is not how you end an expansion. It's how you start one. You can't show us the how did I get here flashback at the end. It doesn't track. You can't end the expansion by asking the question that the audience have been asking all along, like it has only now become relevant, because that's just infuriating. It would be like Jessica Fletcher being at the village fete and then the vicar is murdered and then spending the entire episode talking to suspects and then right at the very end saying, "Ooh, I wonder who actually murdered the vicar. Maybe I should try and find out. See you next time." Jessica would never do that. Jessica's a professional. She would be on it and have it all wrapped up by tea time. Also, and this might be even worse, it's a flashback to give an insight into the jailer's past, but it shows us the jailer after he's already undergone his important defining character change and doesn't show or illuminate anything that made him change. It's basically like if in Star Wars, Luke had asked Obi-Wan how his father became Darth Vader, and Obi-Wan says, "Oh, I'll tell you, Luke." And then a flashback starts, but the flashback is Darth Vader already dressed as Darth Vader, and he picks up a red lightsaber and says, "I'm Darth Vader now." You've totally missed the important and interesting bit that the flashback should have shown. You can still end the expansion on the what is to come tease, but it didn't work to frame it in this scene. Show the Primus asking at the beginning of Shadowlands. The jailer refused to answer and acknowledge it as an important question that we are searching for an answer to, rather than just have the Primus inexplicably decide it's not relevant information to pass on for like a year. Then at the end of the raid, or preferably throughout the expansion, but let's not be greedy, we can see flashbacks of the jailer's journey into uncovering the threat. We still don't need to know what that threat is. Maybe we could see him as the Arbiter, judging a soul that has seen something really unusual and horrifying, and that makes him investigate and become obsessed with the first ones and their forbidden knowledge. And we can see how he changes because of this tantalizing what is to come. And I'm doing the worst thing a creator can do here. I'm basically just writing fanfic now, and that's silly. But sending Zovaal to the moor belongs at the beginning. Actually, there's even a tiny part of me, like 1% of me, that suspects that this scene, this flashback, was supposed to be at the start of the expansion, and that's why the Primus doesn't actually physically feature in it, because of course his appearance didn't get revealed until 9.1. I know lots of you will be sitting there watching this saying, yeah, no shit, Taliesin, that's obviously why the cinematic didn't work. Talk about stating the obvious, but there will be just as many of you who felt a lot of what I just described without really being able to eloquate or pinpoint why. And hopefully I've unlocked something for you with this. I'm sure there are just as many who think I'm totally wrong in every case, and it's shit, and it's just shit because it is, and that's fine too. I have no idea how a story in a game the size of World of Warcraft is put together and employed. I don't know what I'm talking about from a writing point of view. I'm only talking as a consumer here. And I think really, like most people, my disappointment comes mostly from how the jailer has been handled throughout Shadowlands as a whole. And this cutscene is now just working as the official lightning rod for all those justifiable community opinions to make themselves known. And that's understandable, honestly. I'm looking forward to hearing your take on the ending and on my take in the comments below. Go wild. And remember, the jailer sucks, but if you go and give shit to game devs on social media, you are officially worse than an unsatisfactory antagonist in a video game. Sorry, but you just are. Thank you to our patrons as always for making all of our work possible. And look at it this way. This cinematic was by far the best thing that the jailer has done all expansion, because he finally f***ing died.